Friday.
On the weekend, you have.
Not the weekend, no. It was Friday.
Yes. It was a shot,
Yes.
right?
You turn off Beyonce. Dare I turn off Beyonce?
Or cute sex.
Oh my goodness, is that Colette?
I'm just putting on YouTube live stream.
Whoa, we didn't know that. We would have announced it.
Yeah, because well, she asked me to put it on YouTube, and I
You
don't.
see Roberta?
Okay.
There you go.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Oh,
Okay, cool.
wow, very fancy.
Oh, nice. Okay.
All right. So we want to just welcome, thank you for coming out here on a cold Wednesday evening, right? Roberta and I are really appreciative of it. And, you know, truly, of course, we have a whole plan. But what we would like to do is just have a conversation about our work. And you brought the book. Chris, do you have yours?
No, I don't have my book. Yeah, I know you started talking.
Yeah. Joy?
Oh yeah, yeah.
All right, we'll give you this one because that one has one. What we would love to do is just kind of engage in a little bit of a conversation and, you know, have more of an intimate conversation around like why we wrote this, process around writing it, like what it means for us personally. What else?
We are really like genuinely interested in people's reactions, and they've been overwhelmingly positive, but I think this book has really struck a nerve.
Yeah.
And it's kind of conjured up some deep-rooted emotions that people I think are still wrestling with. I know we wrestled quite a bit just with the premise. And so we'd like to also just get your reactions as well.
So we can, you're gonna ask us something?
I was gonna just jump in.
You're gonna give a reaction.
Yeah.
All right.
When I first read the book, it hit home because for me, I remember just being told like, you're the exception. And then you're at the very beginning.
Is it okay if I get some of this?
Absolutely. At the very beginning of your chapter, you had mentioned just like how people come into your life and tell you like you need to leave this space so that you can become better, not realizing that all the things you need to be that best version of yourself is already existing. It took me a while to realize that. It took a lot of unlearning, a lot of like self-awareness.
Yeah.
And at times it was very contentious. Because when I tell people like, well, why do you have to leave? Like why do our kids have to go away to college to get an excellent education? We have really amazing schools in New York City that students and everyone can benefit from. So it really Thank you for that.
Yeah. Did you get a sense like we were talking to you?
Yeah, it really felt like you were talking to me. It's funny because I have the book in my over at my school, and students like saw the book and said, "What are you reading?" And I was like, "Go ahead, I just read through it." It was like we really appreciate how you incorporate some of these things into your instruction, your lesson, and your coaching process on when you give teachers feedback. It's very valuable.
Thank you for sharing that.
That's beautiful.
It is.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I even had Daniel, my maintenance guy, come over to fix a fire, like a smoke detector in my apartment. So he comes up and he notices I have this poster, and he notices the book. And he said, "Hey, just a real quick question." It's like, "Yeah." He's like, "That's your book?" So yeah. He said, "I'm from the Bronx. Like, can we talk about this?" And it ended up just triggering like a really amazing conversation about that, like this thing, because I think the title itself is so clear and plain, and it's interesting because when we were going back and forth with the publisher, they wanted to name it things that were super abstract, and we were pretty committed to making it very clear and plain language on what we were trying to say, because there were people trying to make it kind of like fancy and stuff or something that you can't really connect with.
So what I'm hearing is like the purpose of like keeping it, I guess, supposed to create is to draw people in it. Then it's like oh, like this is about me, people of color who are totally the community. I'm also just wondering, like, how did you go as you wrote this book, or even before you wrote this book? How what was your process of learning? Like, you were all told that you had to leave. Like, how was that for you?
So let's talk about that. All right, so why don't we share a couple and then come back to Crystal again. I'm dying to hear your reaction because you're a two-timer, you know. You came to the Bronx launch, you know, and you're here today, and I just we appreciate this book so much, and also think that there's something about this that really resonates deeply with what here.
Okay.
All right. So let's just do a little bit of intros. Rebecca, you want to start, and I'll go to mine?
Yeah. Well, clearly that's when I had hair. And my kids give me a hard time. They're like, "You really had hair?" Yeah, I did. But what's interesting in that picture, that's my 8th grade picture. And when I look back on it now, I'm reminded of what I felt in my life during that time. And 8th grade was a really interesting year for me because I got in trouble a lot. Like I got suspended a lot. So clearly I had some issues. Didn't know how to handle challenge and conflict and disappointment. But no one really did. It wasn't something anyone ever talked about. But I also remember things like why I went to school. Clearly, I went to school because we had to. But I didn't go to school to really apply myself. I went to school because being at school is better than being at home. I would hate to just spend a day at home. Like home was more crazy than being in a middle school. And I also, during that time realized like I went to school because I was hungry. Like I went to school because I knew I was going to get 2 lunches. And they did too.
Wait, why 2?
Well, just because, I was growing. And I was like, one lunch wasn't enough.
One for me and one for my future self.
Yeah, but they knew. They were so good about it.
Yeah.
So I would eat and still be hungry, and then I would go back up and then let me have another meal. And so the other thing I'll mention about just being in 8th grade was is how I went to sleep every night. So I didn't have the verbiage, I didn't have the language in 8th grade to say, oh, I'm goal setting. Like no one talked like that. But what I did do is I would just repeat certain things to myself over and over until I fell asleep. And that just became just a habit, it became a routine. So every night I would just say, I know things like, I know there's going to be a brighter future, and I'm not going to continue to cycle of just where we lived and how we lived and the challenges that we had. And I would just do that until I fell asleep. And then when I left my community, symbolically, I remember I stood literally. So when graduation took place, they closed the road, and then everyone would mingle in the street. And much of it was like giving hugs and like talk to you soon, or I'll miss you. But for me, it was like I stood in the middle of the road and I looked at this high school, and the messages of you gotta leave, you gotta leave, you gotta leave just kept hitting me. And so I did. And I ended up really leaving, going to school, but when I came back, I found home in the Bronx. And ultimately raised a family, had kids, and then got a chance to go back to my community, of which Nancy came and a few other close friends came when they announced me as superintendent.
That was beautiful.
I remember my very first summer as superintendent, there was a moment where I was like, what the hell am I doing here? And it like shook me. I almost felt a bit paralyzed. I remember I was staring outside of this window, and I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, you work so hard to get away from this place. And like what we put in the book, I heeded the advice from everyone, like you gotta leave if you want to be someone. And what I remember telling myself in that moment was, you're not the little Roberto from, 'cause I would drive by these places that would make me remember some of the trauma that I experienced. But in this moment, I said, you're not here as that person. You're now this person, and you're here to help. And almost kind of like fell in love again.
And it was interesting because Roberto and I, when we met each other, we had the woman who writes the poem, Debbie from the Bronx, Deborah Joel Sherman. She introduced us to each other, which is why we thought it is fitting for Deborah to write the poem or to really share. She grew up in the Bronx, in the housing projects that Sotomayor grew up in, and she didn't serve the Bronx, but she served so many communities that reminded her of home. And I think for me, I'm from East San Jose, California, Mexican. And I thought that I would like live and die in East San Jose. I'd get married, I'd have kids. I mean, I'd do the whole thing. That was just my home. I'm a home girl. The expansion of what I mean by home has really been interesting for me, the process, and I think that in some ways because I was so insulated in my home community, I became really opposed to things like Teach for America and anyone who wanted to come in and try to, fix us or do something else. Like, what about us? We're right here with all the gifts and talents in the world. And it wasn't that I was opposed to programs like that, because I was a principal twice. The second school, I learned how valuable Teach for America could be. But it was more about wanting to be seen. And I think that's what it is. And I think we wrote this book many ways to create spaces to share our, stories of our homes. And I think a big question we have right now is like, for everyone, is like, what is home? And, and we'd love to hear that from both of you. Like, how do you define that? And I think for me, for many years, it was like, home is like East San Jose. I'm a home girl. That was a principal there, like I was a wannabe chola there, I did all of that. And yet now, I'm home here in New York City, and a lot of that's because home for me is in these circles of people of color, women of color, people who are fighting for justice within communities that remind me of home. And the Lead to Succeed mindset, when we talk about that as the problem that we're trying to really think about and solve, go here for a second. And a lot of it is about wanting to call out the idea that if you can pluck a couple of us out, then you can feel good. You're like, all right, I did it, man. Like, have you met Crystal? And you bring Crystal's picture and her story everywhere you go, and you put her on a PowerPoint, and you're like, give a speech. Let me tell you about my story, Crystal. And I think for a while I was that story for a lot of people, and I'm just like looking at my 10 best friends, and we grew up since kindergarten, and I'm like, you're smarter than I could ever be. And yet what happens with the Lead to Succeed mindset, as we named it, is that it names one person as successful and it normalizes failure for the rest. And we see that into adult life. We've heard stories after we wrote this book around people's cousins and siblings, and like this kind of, and how seductive this better than the rest mentality can become. And so I think that's what we wanted to call out. We wanted to say, I'm actually not better than the rest. It's part of this like really oppressive formula that only one of us can do well. And it's part of an oppressive formula that says, like, if you get out of this space, like, you're successful. And if you stay in it, you're doomed to failure. And I think that's what triggered it for us, because we were part of we were on two different coasts, had experienced the same exact thing. We're like, so what is that thing? And this is what we call it.
And it really, so Nancy's talked about how seductive that is, but it dangerously minimizes the contributions of people who saw great value, experienced success, and made a real difference. It minimizes the efforts of those community leaders. And that's dangerous. That's part of what we're trying to, we name a couple of strategies. We try to give life and try to push thinking around like how do we redefine success? And I think as we engage more in these conversations and we hear more people's stories, that there are a lot of great ideas around that. A lot of great ideas that just need to be surfaced around what success and in the truest, most genuine way, what is it?
And one of the, we wrote this piece just like, part of when you consider writing, right? Like our process was, like, is the sector, is the audience even interested in what we have to say around this topic? So when Miguel Cardona became Secretary of Education, we wrote this piece together for Ed Week, and it got a lot of attention. It got a lot of, traction. And what we did in there was saying, like, look, you can name Cardona's, like, his pedigree, you can name all the things he's done, Secretary of Ed, for the state of Connecticut. But are you also naming that, like, he's from the hood, he's from Merida, Connecticut, he was a teacher and principal, he grew up in the projects in Merida, he became a teacher and principal in his home community. Those are the gifts that led him to the state level and now to the federal. So our goal is to begin naming that, to begin highlighting those aspects of people that right now we consider bad, ghetto, like not worthy, but they're actually beautiful gifts that we hold within us that help us do all the things that we know we need to do. So we pause, we've been talking a lot, but let's get some reactions. We'll come to my girl first because.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I guess what draws me to, especially the Lead to Succeed idea, so just my background, I was a part of I'd say like the first charter school movement. That was Uncommon, Achievement First, KIPP in 2005. So I was the first graduating class of my KIPP school.
But you were a student there.
Yes. Yeah. And so I guess like charter schools in general were built with the idea around giving another option in underserved communities. And that's kind of how I've always seen it. So I've been really plucked out of many places. So I was plucked out of my elementary school. I went to 5th grade, and my teacher my 4th grade teacher, she selected about 15 of us, and to go to this charter school that she was going to be a founding teacher at. And in my 8th grade year, I was given an opportunity to go to a program called A Better Chance. It's like a prep for prep. And again, it's the idea of Lead to Succeed because I left and I went to a predominantly white school in Massachusetts. And the interesting thing is there are 2 different types of programs that comes out of ABC. You can either do a traditional boarding school, so I had people who did Andover and those traditional boarding schools, or you can go to a community school program where you attend the local public school, but you live in a house. And so I did that. I did the community school program. And it was a very interesting program because I was able to be in a neighborhood and go to a public school, just different than mine. So when I think about Lead to Succeed, I also think about, had I stayed, and I've also often had this conversation with myself, like if I stayed, would I be successful or would I be at the place that I am right now? I'm not sure. And I don't think it's because I wouldn't have sought out opportunities or, my ability to network with people. And I think that all remains, but I think my home life was really tough. And so staying in that environment, what impact it would have on me, I'm not sure. And so when I was preparing to graduate, the idea of going back to my community it scared me. I had panicked. And so then I did Teach for America. But this is at a time where Teach for America was moving to bring people from the community back to their community. So I was placed at a school that was 2 blocks away from where where my mom still lives. Section 8, tough neighborhood. And it was also a few blocks away from my KIPP school.
In the Bronx.
In Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn. Okay.
In Brooklyn. So and now, so when you talk about the idea of home changing, it has changed for me because I teach at a KIPP school in the Bronx. I always thought I would go back to Crown Heights, Brooklyn, but KIPP is home for me.
Sure.
And so I've been there for 5 years now, teaching and serving the South Bronx, which is very similar to the neighborhood that I grew up in. And I think I struggle with this concept mostly because this was the recipe that I followed. And, I have had conversations with my students in the past about about middle school and high school options.
Sure, yeah.
And not going to the one that everyone goes to.
Sure.
And so I think there's a piece around leaving and coming back. And I think that's always important. But, when I think about staying, it's challenging because I think it's not always as for me, a lot of the times it's not often about, the options and the person, but it's about the conditions. And I felt like I was put in some really challenging conditions. So yeah.
We'll note that on page from 125 to 128 in the Redefining Success chapter, there are, we name all the different ways you can give back. And I think some of the pushback for us, even from my older brother, who said, hey, like, I had to do to succeed. Like, he was heavily involved in gangs. He had to go to Davis, California near Sacramento for 1 year just to make sure, number one, we kept him alive. Number two, he was able to graduate from high school. And then he was able to come back, but when he came back, he's now a mental health juvenile hall. He works for juvenile hall as a mental health therapist. And I said, but Isaac, that's your stay in real story. Like that's what we're trying to lift. And from 125 to 128 in the book, we talk about all the different ways. So it can physically mean you come physically back to the exact neighborhood, right? The way I did that as a teacher principal. So it's like you did that. Roberto did that. Maybe you did that with here. You did do that a lot. Or there's all these other ways, like right now, that I live in New York City that I give back, whether it's financially, and my friends and I, we just organized a whole holiday giving campaign for kids who are high school. Like I mentor a lot of women of color. There's all these different ways that you can continue to contribute without, you have to figure out where you are in your life, like what you're able to give, what you can't give, what your trauma has been, how you're healing, what the process is in healing. So we just want to make that clear too.
Yeah. And there was a piece for me at one point during this process.
I think you're out of the video, but a little bit.
It's getting really relaxed. I kind of wrestled too at some point, like leaving and what does that mean? Like for me.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're not saying don't leave. We're saying you should, children should have options. They should decide for themselves. And that's very different when you have adults that you love and they have your back. They're down for you. And they're the very ones saying, you gotta leave. And if you don't, you're gonna end up like that person, right? And that person is always someone everyone knows, right? They can name that person.
Yeah.
It's when you're constantly told that you have to, because when it's done in that way, you don't have an option. You really don't.
What does it say about your family and your friends?
Yeah, and
that's the piece.
So we try to be very careful because we're not saying you can't leave. No, you can choose for yourself what's best for you and your family. And if we're willing to accept that home, you are home wherever you're at. You don't shred your identity and your upbringing simply because you moved somewhere else. But do so with pride. And I think part of what we're really, one of the things we're trying to do in this book is to not demonize our communities.
Yeah, I made it good luck, Yeah.
We're saying pass the elevator back down.
Yeah.
We're talking about supporting
Yeah.
other people from your community, giving back in some way. So for us, we happen to go back. But for those who don't, how can you support your community?
One of our panelists said, she said, Eva Mejia, she's the ed art of IDEO, and she said, in the Bay Area, we had a talk, and she said, for me, my stay in Prevail story is that I bring me wherever I go, all of me. Like I show up, I stay in Prevail within first, because I can do that within first. And for me, that's how I receive and take this. So many different ways. Reactions. Oh, good.
No, I was going to say another example that's in the book is Richard Carranza. Another good example of someone who everywhere he goes, you feel it.
I think the vignette is I have to be me. And he talks about when he enters into rooms, even as the chancellor of New York City, it's as if he was entering into a room like with his family. You know, he goes, he greets everyone, looks him in the eye, like that's how he enters.
Yeah.
And he's not going to stop who he is as a result of like, because he's so fancy new role in the largest city.
And people struggle with that. They don't feel like they can always be themselves and reflect their community and spaces they go in all the time.
Yeah, we've struggled with that.
And it's good to have models like, no, these people show up. And when they show up, you know they're from a particular area. They bring their culture with them, their language, and
Irma Zardoya, one of the reinas del Bronx, she talks about how, she was a regional soup of all of the Bronx, and she was also District 10 superintendent. That every time she had a gathering, she'd always bring music, and she would always be the first in the dance floor. And she said for her, that was like showing up as a human being. Like, we dance, man, and we can get down. And it just helped people connect with her, get past like the wall of, oh my God, you're the regional superintendent. Reactions.
I guess like what I heard every think about just like me, like how I demonized my community. So some background, I'm from the Bronx, New York.
Yeah.
Originally, I'm the Fort Mill area. And just like you, funny enough, I also did TFA, and TFA actually placed me in my neighborhood to teach. And with my story is that although I never had the opportunity to really lead, I still demonized my neighborhood because people were telling me, you gotta get out there, you have to leave. I taught in the Bronx my whole entire life. I went to school in the Bronx. Been doing it ever since. I'm kind of glad I didn't really have the opportunity to really leave, because it really taught me like, you didn't leave and yet you still made it to this part in your life, right? You were still able to get into doors that people would never think that you were able to get through. And I teach kids that, like I say, I never left, right? And look at me now. I have all of these things going for me because I showed up as me, because I learned to really value where I come from, who I am, and I learned that the people who came before me, they played a role into that, and I had the responsibility to pay back to them. And for me, I guess home has always been the Bronx, because although it wasn't necessarily my own childhood, it's also taught me like what home does it feel like.
Yeah.
You don't have it yet, you may not have it yet, but you with enough perseverance and work and believe in yourself, you can create that stability.
it's leadership.
And I bet the students like connect, like they want to hear your story. They love that you're from the Bronx, right?
Yeah, it's like you're from the Bronx, you're Dominican, like, yeah. And it's like, wait, so you don't understand like Spanish, like absolutely. And so I start speaking in Spanish, putting Spanish songs on, they walk into the room, they're like, yo, you rock to this? Like, you do it? Like, yeah, I know exactly. But you listen to, I listen to. Your holiday parties are pretty similar to my holiday parties, I'm pretty sure. But it's also the parents love it. When parents come in and meet you, they're relatable. They can connect with you. They don't have to hide the fact, like, this is what my home is like, because they kind of get the idea, the gist, because that's what my home is like. And it also teaches me to just think about, like, how to support teachers and really thinking about, like, you don't have to save them. They have everything they need. What you need to learn how to do, or what we need to learn how to do is really reflect how do we leverage those skills, those gifts, that joy factor, to really create an environment of learning, not just for students but for teachers too.
I know we have about 5-7 minutes remaining, but wanted to just ask you, what is it?
That's so fast.
And so, no, I know.
Really good.
It's an interesting, I mean, this really is our goal here. I think we'd love to end the conversation around, what is the Stay and Prevail story? I mean, so it's interesting because our publisher, came up with this title, Stay and Prevail, and we really debated wanting to call it the Lead to Succeed mindset. We wanted to name the deficit-based mindset just as a way of triggering and way of provoking conversations that we think are not being had. And that was, one of our main goals. And we realized that they were right, that it was really around so what, now what? What's the affirmative sort of, angle around this? And so we've come to a place where we're saying, what is your Stay and Prevail story? And both of you have shared it. We have them. How do we, what is the right pathway forward if this is harmful? And I'll tell you, just being one of 6 kids and seeing them, some of my siblings still struggle, I realize, and I carry a lot of, survivor's guilt, that I was the one who got selected to do this or that, and they struggle to this day and feel really bad about themselves as people, and, all of those things. And I'm thinking, part of it was because folks said, oh, well, look, man, Roberto's the one has to do, well, I did my job, this entire community doesn't deserve, but a couple of folks will, a couple of kids care, a couple of families care. And it's almost like deeming who can be sacrificed. And so, just really thinking about what the Stay and Prevail story, and I think for me, I would love for us to just kind of end this way, is to think, what is your Stay and Prevail story? And for me, it's really about how do we lift the assets of our community? How can we create spaces where communities are places people feel really proud of, where even if you do leave, you don't turn your back. Even if you do leave, you figure out ways to contribute and reinvest in it. There's so many different ways to do that. And we outline that. And also to shift really from individualism to collectivism. Really thinking that if I win, it doesn't mean you have to lose. We can actually all succeed. In fact, I know many communities now that I'm well traveled, where you go in and everyone succeeds. Why do we have to be only a few? Where everyone goes to a great school, everyone is on track, everyone is expected to do well. So why can't they be us? And I think that they've almost, this mentality, this Lead to Succeed mindset almost pits us against each other. To say, I'm going to be the one who gets out. I'm going to be the one who does well. And it's just really harmful to our communities. We don't deserve it. We deserve more. So that is kind of my Stay and Prevail mission right now, to really lift those assets.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's twofold. It's recognizing that the answer is in the room, and there's not this reliance on someone coming from the outside to solve what the society has deemed the ills of the community. That the talent, the expertise actually already exists. We write about that a little bit. We refer to it as waiting for Superman, or these people who come in and they have their capes on. And the question whether they're really invested. Not to say you can't be someone from the outside that comes into a new community. It happens every single day. But you should come in with a respect and an understanding that you're there to collaborate and lift up the people who are already there. And that's a big difference. I think that's where external people really fail, is that they're the silver bullet, and they don't pay respect to the beauty of the community. And then I just think we got to redefine success. And I think that is part of that collectivism, is we all have to put our minds together to really figure out, what does that look like, feel like, sound like? Because if we allow other people to do it for our community, then they're gonna, this notion of getting closer to whiteness will continue to be what people see as success. And hopefully this book is a step in that direction, that escaping, right? Because that's how it's positioned to us, that we have to escape, hurry up, leave, get out, or else. So I would say that's mine.
Closing thoughts, Stay and Prevail, calls to action.
I just had a conversation with someone today about paying it forward, and like what that means. And for a while, I thought paying it forward meant that basically I had to do everything that the people before me did. And so it just so happened that I'm always in the position where it's very similar, where I am that kid now, or well, I'm the adult now from when I was that kid. And so I think about that, just like how, in what ways am I paying it forward? I'm also thinking about how I'm making an impact in my school community. I lived in Brooklyn. Up
Crown
until-
Heights?
Well, yeah, Bed-Stuy. I actually lived in Bed-Stuy for a while, and I just bought a house in Yonkers. And part of that, thank you. Part of that was moving closer to my school. And so I've started to, especially within this internship, I started to think about what impact it can have on the community. And that also means getting to know the community, not just the students and the parents, but actually like interacting with people in the community. And so I thought about, I just had a meeting about ways in which I can support the social work team and trying to like do community outreach and figure out what it is that the community needs. So I think about that. The last thing I also think about is KIPP changed their model. They used to have KIPP to college. It's now to and through, and it's college and career. And I think a lot about that in the conversations that I have with my students. Often, I ask them, "Oh, where's your sister going to college?" And I just kind of like have been more open to celebrating the different career paths people have taken, and I think that's really important. I had a parent who was my Uber Eats guy, and like the celebration around that, so, and making a big deal out of it, I think is important, because a lot of times people in different careers aren't always celebrating. So I think about doing that and making sure my kids are seeing that, and why celebrating their parents, what they do, is so important. And that conversation now, especially with someone who they respect and they listen to at their age, is really important.
I think for me, it's just like causing this partnership of just supporting towards the community and its resources, and how do you leverage those resources to really disrupt systems that create lack of access for parents, students, and other stakeholders in the community. I also think that like understanding that you need, as an educator, you need to understand like the external events, so that you know how to like address some of the issues that do go on in your school, so that you can make the right decisions, and really figure out a way to involve other members in the community. Because sometimes some places work like in isolation, like they're very disconnected from the community, not realizing like, hey, like maybe some of the answers are here. The answers probably are with your parents. The answers are down the block from that nonprofit organization, right? Like you don't have to really go too far out to get these resources. The answers are there.
Oh, thank you for this. Great. I feel reinvigorated, excited.
Amazing.
Grateful.
Like, when these stories come out, and it's like, yeah, everything you just said. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
I feel like we wrote this to have these exact conversations. That those aren't me. It's like, it's like, can we provoke? Can we provoke? And you'll see that we try to even practice staying in Prevail within the book. Like, it doesn't say essential questions. It says shoulder up. Like we try to talk the way we talk, the way we chill, the way we try to bring ourselves into spaces. And it's always tempting to kind of leave a little bit of.
I'm really proud of that too.
Yeah.
I'm glad it wasn't
Yeah.
just, hopefully when you read it, you got a sense of like, oh, they're keeping it real.
We try. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.
Yeah, I like it.